Good evening. I'm Father Alexander. This is St. Peter's in Hove, and here we are doing our walking tour of the Bible. We're now on our 207th step, and we're going to be looking at chapter 5 of the book of Proverbs. Chapter 5 is another exhortation from the pupil to the master, and this time the master is saying, keep away from bad women. In particular, keep away from adulterous women. My son, pay attention to my wisdom, listen carefully to what I know, so that you may preserve discretion and your lips may guard knowledge. Take no notice of a loose living woman, for the lips of the adulteress drip with honey. Her palate is more unctuous than oil, but in the end she is bitter wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, Sheol the goal of her steps. Far from following the path of life, her course is uncertain, and she does not know it. Okay, we get the message. Keep away from the adulterous woman, because the adulterous woman will kill you. Okay, but I think we need to unpack this a bit, don't we? Now, as I said the last time we met, I mentioned the fact that the tree of life is mentioned in the book of Proverbs. So there's clearly a crossover between the book of Proverbs and the story of the Garden of Eden. The story of the Garden of Eden is often portrayed as the woman bringing death, she gives Adam the fruit, whose mortal taste brought death into our world and all our woe. So Eve is the bringer of death, the bringer of evil. And Eve, of course, is a woman. Here we have a woman who is the bringer of death, the temptress, the bringer of evil. There's a difference, though. There's one important difference. Eve is a wife, and she's a legitimate wife, whereas this is an adulteress. Now, what he then goes on to say is as follows. Now, son, listen to me. Never deviate from what I say. Set your course as far from her as possible. Go nowhere near the door of her house, or she will hand over your honor to others. The years of your life to a man without pity, and strangers will batten on your property, and your produce will go to the house of a stranger. And at your ending, your body and flesh having been consumed, you will groan and exclaim, Alas, I hated discipline. My heart spurned all correction. I would not attend to the voice of my masters. I would not listen to those who tried to teach me. Now I have come to nearly every kind of misery in the assembly and in the community. Well, it seems to be saying that, well, not only is adultery death, adultery is also a lack of prosperity, and adultery also will mean a lack of standing in the community. And adultery is a result of what? A lack of discipline. And that word discipline is mentioned in verse 12 and also in the final verse, verse 23. For want of discipline, he dies, concludes the chapter, led astray by his own excessive folly. It isn't really very convincing to us. I don't think people commit adultery purely because of their lack of discipline. I think it goes much further than that. Certainly, a lack of discipline is a necessary precondition for committing adultery, but it's so much more than just that. It means being in a marriage where you are not entirely satisfied by what your marriage has to offer, and you're thinking essentially the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. There are many other reasons why people fall into sexual sin. It's worth going into. I think one of the reasons is not just pleasure, but they are tempted by the sense of importance they feel when they're having an illicit affair. The other thing, of course, is when you have an illicit affair, you are kicking over the traces. You are doing something naughty. You're doing something transgressive. You're doing the sort of thing that if people found out, they would be shocked and they would be condemnatory. And you have the thrill of not being found out, of not being condemned, of getting away with it. I don't think we should underestimate human beings' desire to pull a fast one, to get away with it. We know, do we not, that in Italy it is said certain politicians, I ought not to name them, who got away with it were greatly admired by the population because they did what the rest of us want to do: be outrageous and get away with it. And of course, most of us live very quiet lives. We don't do outrageous things. And of course, this the only positive thing that the writer has to say is this: find joy with the wife you married in your youth, fair as a hind, graceful as a fawn. Hers the breasts that ever fill you with delight, hers the love that ever holds you captive. They think, love your wife, the wife you chose when you were a young man. Stick with the wife who you loved from the beginning. Why be seduced, my son, by someone else's wife, and fondle the breast of a woman who belongs to another? For the eyes of the Lord observe human ways and survey all human parts. Now, here we've got something quite interesting. Why be seduced? Now, seduce, we know what seduction is. Seduce, the root of the word is why be led astray? Why be led off the right path? What's wrong with the right path? Surely the right path is to be loved simply because it is right. So discipline keeps you on the right path. Okay, but discipline alone is never going to keep you on the right path. You've got to love the right path. You've got to love being married. You've got to love the person you're married to. You've got to love the life of sobriety and study and being, I suppose, in this context, a pious Israelite. You've got to love the law of the Lord. And we Christians, we've got to love the law of the Lord. We've got to realize that the law of the Lord is given for our good. The law of the Lord is something which mediates God's love to us. We've got to love the rightness. We've got to love justice. We've got to love truth. And we do not look aside from rightness and truth. This is the right path because, and here the author's got something right, that essentially sin is delusory. We will go off and commit sin and we'll come back very disappointed by what we found. I wonder what our blessed Lord was thinking of when he enunciated his greatest parable, the parable of the prodigal son. The prodigal son decided he had everything. He had a nice father. Okay, maybe the other brother wasn't so great, but he lived in a big house with lots of servants and they were rich. And he decided he didn't want it. He wanted to go away to a far country and spend all his money on a life of debauchery. Now, you've got two things. First of all, the virtuous life was not for him. He wanted a life of vice, but he was ashamed of his instincts. That's why he went to a far country. Why he couldn't have a bit of debauchery just a few miles down the road, I don't know. No, he had to go to a very far country, and he ends up deeply disappointed. It's not just that the country experiences a severe recession, famine, but it's that the debauchery in itself is unsatisfying for human beings. Ask yourself, what is it you really want? What is it that can satisfy you? What is the thing you're looking for that when you find it, you won't go on looking for other things? Well, I know the answer. You know the answer. The answer to that is love. We love truth and we love other human beings. Debauchery, adultery, has nothing to do with love. Adultery is to do with the ego. Love is the annihilation of the ego. Love is losing yourself in another person. Love of ideas is losing yourself in those ideas. So this, I think this chapter has got actually something to say. It's not just discipline, though. There's more to it than that. I don't think the feminists are altogether right in saying Eve is a temptress, the adulterous woman is a temptress. Therefore, the wisdom literature sees women as essentially snares and delusions. They're not. And of course, the wife, whose breasts you love, etc., as breasts fill you with delight, she's not a snare and a delusion. She's the good woman. So it's not that he hates all women. You can't really say that the person who wrote this is a misogynist. He clearly upholds marriage. One of the things about our Jewish brethren is that they believe in marriage very strongly. Every 18-year-old in these days was married off by his 19th birthday, and he was expected to go and have lots and lots of children, and that was what one did. Marriage was the natural state of man. With the Christian dispensation, that rather changes. But for most people, even today, marriage is a high vocation, even though it's a common vocation, and it's a vocation they should love. I do hope this makes sense. do read this chapter. It is quite fascinating because it's one of the very few chapters we've encountered, if not the very first chapter we've encountered in the Bible so far. And look how far we've got in the Bible. We're halfway through. It's one of the very few chapters that deals with sexual desire. I do think, as a matter of fact, he might be onto something when he equates sexual desire with death. Sexual desire leading to sin, sin leading to death. Sexual desire per se on its own will lead to one thing, which is like death, grievous disappointment. Hope that helps. All the best. Bye.